Ladies and gentlemen, today, we delve into one of history's most significant battles, the Battle of Ain Jalut, fought on September 3, 1260. This clash between the Mamluks of Egypt and the Mongol Empire was not just a military confrontation. It was a turning point that shaped the future of the Middle East and halted the Mongol advance into the Islamic world. The Battle of Ain Jalut took place on September 3, 1260, in a region known as Ain Jalut, or the Spring of Goliath. This location, situated in present-day Palestine, was strategically important due to its geographical features. Ain Jalut was a fertile valley surrounded by rolling hills and dense vegetation, offering a natural advantage for defensive and ambush tactics. At the time, the Mongols had already swept across much of Asia, Persia, and the Middle East. They had conquered Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate, and had overrun Syria and much of the Levant. Their armies, led by Hulagu Khan, had devastated entire cities, leaving destruction in their wake. With their terrifying reputation for massacring entire populations, the Mongols had created an aura of invincibility. However, after Hulagu returned east to deal with internal Mongol conflicts, he left a portion of his army under the command of his trusted General Kitbuqa to continue the campaign into Egypt. Egypt, controlled by the Mamluks, was the last major stronghold standing between the Mongols and complete dominance of the Islamic world. The Mamluks, under the leadership of Sultan ad-Din Qutuz, knew that a direct confrontation was inevitable. Instead of waiting for the Mongols to invade Egypt, Qutuz made a bold decision. He would take the fight to the Mongols. Ain Jalut was chosen as the battleground due to its terrain advantages. The Mamluks could use the hills and forests to set up ambush positions, something they planned to exploit against the Mongols. The location was also significant because of its biblical and historical associations. It was believed to be the place where the legendary battle between David and Goliath had taken place centuries earlier. The symbolism of a smaller force defeating a seemingly unbeatable giant was not lost on the Mamluks, who saw themselves as defenders of Islam against an overwhelming foe. Thus, on that fateful day of September 3, 1260, the forces of Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant General Baibars clashed with the Mongol army of Kitbuqa in a battle that would determine the fate of the Middle East. The stage was set for one of the most pivotal moments in military history. The Battle of Ain Jalut was not just another medieval battle. It was a collision between two of the most formidable military forces of the era. On one side stood the Mongol Empire, the most feared and ruthless war machine of the 13th century. On the other side stood the Mamluks of Egypt, an elite warrior class known for their discipline, resilience, and unmatched cavalry tactics. The Mongols, a legacy of fear and conquest. The Mongol Empire, founded by Genghis Khan in the early 13th century, had grown into the largest contiguous land empire in history. Their military campaigns were swift, brutal, and devastating. By the time of the Battle of Ain Jalut, the Mongols had already sacked Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate, and had overrun Syria and much of the Levant. Their advance was relentless, and their reputation for annihilating entire cities created fear across the Islamic world. The Mongol force at Ain Jalut was led by Kitbuqa, a seasoned Mongol general of Nestorian Christian origin. Unlike many Mongol commanders, Kitbuqa was known for his extreme brutality and had ordered mass executions in cities like Damascus and Aleppo. Though a talented warrior, he was dealing with a weakened force, as a significant portion of the Mongol army had been recalled to the east after the death of Mongol Khan, the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Hulagu Khan, the Mongol ruler of the Ilkhanate, had left Kitbuqa in charge of a smaller Mongol detachment, expecting them to crush the Mamluks before reinforcements could arrive. Despite their smaller numbers compared to previous Mongol invasions, Kitbuqa's army still carried the fearsome reputation of Mongol warriors. They were known for their fast-moving cavalry, expert archery, and psychological warfare tactics, often terrorizing enemies before battles even began. They had never suffered a major defeat until Ain Jalut. The Mamluks, Egypt's warrior kings. The Mamluks, originally slave soldiers, had risen through the ranks to become the ruling elite of Egypt. Unlike other medieval armies, the Mamluks were not composed of feudal levies or peasant soldiers. They were a professional, elite warrior class, trained in the art of war from childhood. These warriors, many of them of Turkic and Circassian origin, had been bought as slaves, trained rigorously in military tactics, and later granted power and authority. By the time of Ain Jalut, the Mamluks were under the leadership of Sultan ad-Din Qutuz, a bold and decisive ruler who had seized power in Egypt. He recognized that the Mongols posed an existential threat to the Islamic world and took immediate action to prepare for battle. One of the key figures in Qutuz's army was Baibars, a brilliant and aggressive general who would later become Sultan of Egypt. Baibars was a master of battlefield tactics, and his understanding of Mongol warfare played a crucial role in the Mamluk strategy at Ain Jalut. Unlike previous armies that had tried to face the Mongols head-on, Baibars planned to use speed, deception, and ambush tactics to counter their overwhelming firepower. The Mamluk army was composed mostly of heavy cavalry and horse archers, much like the Mongols themselves. However, unlike the Mongols, the Mamluks were well adapted to the terrain of the Middle East, giving them an advantage in their own homeland. Their knowledge of local geography, supply lines, and climate conditions played a vital role in their preparation for the battle. A battle of opposites. The clash between the Mongols and the Mamluks was more than just a military engagement. It was a battle between two completely different ways of war. The Mongols relied on lightning-fast raids, psychological terror, and superior mobility, while the Mamluks depended on structured battle formations, counter-ambush tactics, and resilience in direct combat. With both sides having their strengths and weaknesses, the outcome of the battle would not be determined by brute force alone. It would come down to strategy, leadership, and the ability to adapt to an unpredictable battlefield. Mongol expansion, a relentless path of conquest. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire had become the most dominant military force in the world. Originating from the steppes of Mongolia, the Mongols, under the leadership of Genghis Khan, had launched a series of aggressive conquests that reshaped the global landscape. Their empire stretched from China to Eastern Europe, encompassing vast territories in Persia, Central Asia, Russia, and the Middle East. Their military campaigns were marked by brutal efficiency, strategic genius, and merciless destruction. The Mongols were not just conquerors. They were a force of nature that left cities in ruins and civilizations shattered. The fall of Baghdad, 1258, the end of the Abbasid Caliphate. One of the Mongols' most devastating conquests occurred in 1258, when the forces of Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, marched on Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Baghdad, once a thriving center of Islamic learning, culture, and governance, was completely annihilated. The Mongols killed hundreds of thousands of inhabitants, including scholars, poets, and scientists. They threw countless books from the House of Wisdom, one of the greatest libraries in history, into the Tigris River, reportedly turning its waters black with ink. The fall of Baghdad was not just a military victory. It was a psychological blow to the entire Muslim world. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had been a spiritual and political authority for centuries, was now extinct. This left the Islamic world fractured and vulnerable, allowing the Mongols to continue their march unopposed. The conquest of Syria and the advance toward Egypt. After sacking Baghdad, Hulagu Khan continued his campaign westward. The Mongols stormed through Syria, capturing Aleppo and Damascus in 1260. Just like in Baghdad, these cities faced horrific destruction. The Mongols executed civilians, burned down entire neighborhoods, and destroyed mosques, libraries, and markets. The fear of the Mongols spread like wildfire, and many smaller cities surrendered without a fight to avoid the same fate. Hulagu's next target was Egypt, the last major stronghold of the Islamic world. Egypt was ruled by the Mamluks, a powerful military caste that had recently seized control from the Ayyubid dynasty. Hulagu believed that the Mamluks would fall just as easily as Baghdad and Damascus had. Before launching the invasion of Egypt, Hulagu sent a message to Sultan Qutuz, demanding his surrender. The message was filled with threats, boasting about Mongol power and warning that resistance would lead to the same fate as Baghdad. The letter read, "We have conquered vast lands and have purified the earth of disorder. Submit to us and you shall live in peace, or resist, and you shall be destroyed like all those before you." However, unlike other rulers who had been terrified into submission, Qutuz did not cower. He executed the Mongol messengers and declared war, sending a clear message: Egypt would not bow to the Mongols. A temporary halt, the death of Monk Khan. As the Mongols prepared for their final push into Egypt, an unexpected event forced them to pause their campaign. Monk Khan, the great Khan of the Mongol Empire, died in 1259. This triggered a major succession crisis, as multiple Mongol princes vied for power. Hulagu was forced to return to Mongolia with a large portion of his army, leaving only a smaller force under General Kitbuqa to continue the invasion of Egypt. This sudden reduction in Mongol forces created an opportunity for the Mamluks. They realized that if they struck now, they had a chance to stop the Mongol advance before reinforcements could arrive. Thus, rather than waiting for an invasion, Qutuz and his General Baibars decided to march out and face the Mongols head-on. With the Mongols having never been defeated in open battle up to this point, many believed that resistance was futile. However, the Mamluks had one advantage that no previous army had: a deep understanding of Mongol warfare and a strategy designed to exploit their weaknesses. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine the fate of the Middle East. Mamluk leadership, Sultan Qutuz and Baibars, the defenders of Islam. The Mongol Empire had already devastated the Islamic world, and as their forces prepared to march into Egypt, many believed that no one could stop them. The cities of Baghdad, Aleppo, and Damascus had fallen, their populations massacred, and their rulers powerless against Mongol might. However, in Egypt, a new force was rising, one that would not submit to fear. At the center of this resistance stood two legendary figures, Sultan Saif ad-Din Qutuz and General Baibars. These two leaders would play a critical role in organizing, strategizing, and inspiring the Mamluk forces to stand against the Mongols at Ain Jalut. Their leadership was marked by bravery, tactical brilliance, and an unshakable resolve to defend their homeland and faith. Sultan Qutuz, the bold ruler who defied the Mongols. Saif ad-Din Qutuz was not born into royalty. He was a Mamluk slave who had risen to power through military skill and political cunning. Like many Mamluks, he had been brought to Egypt as a young boy, trained in combat, and eventually became one of the most formidable warriors of his time. By 1259, Egypt was in turmoil. The ruling Ayyubid dynasty had weakened, and internal power struggles left the country vulnerable. At this crucial moment, Qutuz seized power, overthrowing the weak sultan and declaring himself the ruler of Egypt. His rise was not about personal ambition. It was a desperate move to save Egypt from the Mongol threat. One of Qutuz's first acts as sultan was to prepare Egypt for war. He knew that diplomacy would not stop the Mongols. When Hulagu Khan sent his envoys demanding Egypt's surrender, Qutuz responded with unprecedented defiance. He executed the Mongol messengers and displayed their heads on the gates of Cairo. This was an outright declaration of war, a sign that the Mamluks would fight to the death rather than submit. Qutuz then focused on unifying Egypt's military factions. Many feared the Mongols and believed resistance was futile, but Qutuz refused to back down. He gave passionate speeches, rallying his people with the belief that they were fighting not just for Egypt, but for Islam itself. He called upon warriors, civilians, and religious leaders to prepare for battle, turning Cairo into a center of military mobilization. Despite being a political newcomer, Qutuz proved to be a masterful wartime leader. He formed alliances with local rulers, gathered intelligence on Mongol movements, and prepared his army with rigorous training. However, he knew that he could not do it alone. For battlefield tactics, he relied on one of the greatest military minds of the age, Baibars. Baibars, the brilliant general who outsmarted the Mongols. If Qutuz was the bold and decisive ruler, Baibars was the tactical genius who made victory possible. Like Qutuz, Baibars was also a former Mamluk slave who had risen through the ranks due to his exceptional military skills, strategic brilliance, and fearlessness in battle. Baibars had extensive experience fighting against the Crusaders and Mongols, making him the ideal commander for the upcoming battle. He had studied Mongol tactics, understood their weaknesses, and devised a strategy to counter their fast-moving cavalry and relentless archery. Unlike previous Muslim armies that had tried to face the Mongols head-on and failed, Baibars planned to use deception, terrain advantage, and ambush tactics to turn the tide of battle. His plan was simple yet effective. Lure the Mongols into a trap by pretending to retreat. Use the terrain of Ain Jalut, with its hills and narrow valleys, to disrupt Mongol formations. Launch a surprise counterattack once the Mongols were overextended. Baibars' role was not just strategic. He was also a warrior who led from the front. His aggressive and fearless nature inspired the Mamluk troops, who saw him as a commander willing to fight alongside them rather than dictate from the rear. The unity of leadership, a rare but crucial partnership. One of the key reasons for the Mamluk success at Ain Jalut was the rare unity between Qutuz and Baibars. In medieval Islamic history, conflicts between rulers and generals were common, often leading to internal strife and weakened military forces. However, in this moment of crisis, Qutuz and Baibars set aside personal ambitions and worked together for the greater cause. Qutuz provided the vision, leadership, and political stability needed to unite Egypt. Baibars provided the military expertise and battlefield strategies that gave the Mamluks a fighting chance. Their combined leadership transformed a desperate defensive effort into one of the most brilliant military victories in Islamic history. The battle ahead would not be easy, but under their command, the Mamluks were ready to defy the might of the Mongol Empire. Mamluk strategy, tactical genius at Ain Jalut. The Mongols were considered unstoppable, a force that had swept across Asia and the Middle East, annihilating entire civilizations with terrifying speed and efficiency. They had defeated the Chinese, Persians, and the Abbasids, and no army had ever successfully repelled them in open battle. However, at Ain Jalut, the Mamluks did what no one else had done before. They developed a strategy specifically designed to counter Mongol warfare and executed it with brilliant precision. Understanding Mongol tactics, the key to victory. The Mongols were known for their highly mobile cavalry, expert archery, and psychological warfare. Their army was structured around speed, deception, and relentless attacks, often overwhelming enemies before they had a chance to react. A typical Mongol battle strategy involved feigned retreats. Mongol forces would pretend to flee, luring their enemies into a chase before ambushing them with hidden reinforcements. Hit-and-run tactics. Their horse archers would shower arrows on enemy forces while constantly moving, making it nearly impossible to retaliate effectively. Encirclement. Once an enemy army was weakened, the Mongols would surround them from all sides, cutting off any chance of escape. Psychological terror. Before battles, the Mongols would spread stories of their past massacres, often causing enemy forces to surrender without a fight. The Mamluks, led by Baibars and Qutuz, knew that a traditional head-on clash would end in disaster. They had studied Mongol tactics and prepared a strategy that would turn the Mongols' own strengths against them. The Mamluk battle plan, turning the tables. Instead of waiting for the Mongols to attack Cairo, Qutuz and Baibars decided to go on the offensive, a bold and risky move. They knew that the Mongols had never fought a battle in Palestine before, meaning the Mamluks had a home field advantage. The key elements of their strategy were 1. Luring the Mongols into a trap. Rather than engaging the Mongols immediately, Baibars ordered a controlled retreat, making it seem as if the Mamluks were fleeing in panic. This played directly into the Mongols' expectations. They had used this tactic countless times against their enemies. Kitbuqa, the Mongol general, fell for the trick and pursued the retreating Mamluks into the Ain Jalut Valley. This was exactly what Baibars wanted. The Mongols, thinking they had the Mamluks on the run, charged forward without realizing they were being led into a pre-planned ambush. 2. Using the terrain to their advantage. The location of Ain Jalut was chosen very carefully. Unlike the open plains where Mongol cavalry thrived, Ain Jalut was a valley surrounded by hills, trees, and rough terrain. The Mongols, who relied on open field maneuverability, found themselves bottlenecked into a confined space. The Mamluks had hidden reserves of cavalry in the hills, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As soon as the Mongols were deep inside the valley, Baibars gave the signal, and the ambush was launched. 3. Countering Mongol horse archers with Mamluk heavy cavalry. Mongol armies relied heavily on their horse archers, who could fire arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at full speed. Most armies had been unable to counter this, as Mongols would attack from a distance, avoiding close combat. However, the Mamluks were different. They had their own skilled horse archers, but more importantly, they had heavy cavalry equipped with lances, swords, and full armor. The moment the Mongols entered the valley, the Mamluks charged at full speed, forcing the Mongols into close combat, where their arrows were far less effective. The Mongols, unaccustomed to fighting in such tight spaces, were suddenly on the defensive. 4. Psychological warfare, breaking Mongol morale. For the first time, the Mongols found themselves outmaneuvered. Their usual strategies were failing, and their enemies were fighting back harder than expected. Qutuz, knowing that morale was key, rode to the front lines himself, shouting battle cries and rallying his troops. His famous cry of "Why Islam? O Islam!" could be heard across the battlefield, inspiring his soldiers to fight with unmatched determination. This was a stark contrast to Mongol armies, which often relied on their sheer momentum to crush resistance. For the first time, it was the Mongols who were losing their confidence. A battle of strategy, not just strength. The Mongols had faced many formidable enemies before, but the Mamluks were different. Unlike the static, predictable armies of Europe and the Middle East, the Mamluks had developed a highly flexible fighting style that combined speed with heavy armor. Unlike European knights, who were slow and cumbersome, Mamluk cavalry could move quickly while still being heavily protected. Adaptability. While many armies crumbled after the first Mongol assault, the Mamluks had learned from past defeats and developed countermeasures. Superior leadership. Baibars' tactical genius and Qutuz's fearless leadership ensured that the Mamluks remained organized under pressure. Every aspect of the battle was carefully planned and executed. The Mamluks didn't just fight harder, they fought smarter. Their ability to adapt to Mongol tactics, use the terrain to their advantage, and execute a flawless ambush was what made Ain Jalut one of the most significant victories in military history. The Battle of Ain Jalut, a clash that changed history. The Battle of Ain Jalut, fought on September 3, 1260, was far more than just a military engagement. It was a turning point in world history. It was here, in the plains of Palestine, that the unstoppable Mongol war machine met its first major defeat. The Mongols had swept across Asia and the Middle East like a storm, destroying empires, massacring cities, and instilling fear in all who opposed them. But at Ain Jalut, they faced an enemy who had learned from their tactics, adapted to their warfare, and refused to surrender. The Mamluks, led by Sultan Qutuz and General Baibars, did not just fight for Egypt, they fought for the survival of the entire Islamic world. Had they failed, nothing would have stood between the Mongols and complete domination of the Middle East. The battle was fought with unmatched intensity, as two of history's greatest military forces clashed in a struggle that would determine the fate of an entire civilization. The battlefield, a trap set in the valleys of Ain Jalut. Ain Jalut, meaning Spring of Goliath, was an area chosen carefully by the Mamluks. Located in present-day Palestine, it was surrounded by rocky hills and forests, making it an unusual battleground for the Mongols, who were accustomed to fighting in vast open plains. The Mamluks had spent weeks preparing for this encounter. Instead of waiting to be attacked, they had advanced from Egypt to meet the Mongols head-on, a bold move that caught their enemies off guard. Qutuz and Baibars had already devised a strategy that would turn the Mongols' own favorite tactics against them. The Mongol charge, Kitbuqa falls for the trap. The Mongol army, led by General Kitbuqa, entered the battlefield confident of victory. They had already crushed the Abbasid Caliphate, conquered Persia, and seized Syria. To them, Ain Jalut was just another step toward Egypt's inevitable defeat. At the start of the battle, Baibars launched a series of fast, aggressive cavalry attacks against the Mongol front lines. His soldiers fired arrows and javelins, creating chaos, and then quickly retreated before the Mongols could counterattack. This was a deliberate psychological tactic meant to frustrate and provoke Kitbuqa into making a rash decision. Baibars' feigned retreat was executed with flawless discipline. He made it appear as if the Mamluks were panicking and fleeing, just as so many other armies had done before when facing the Mongols. Kitbuqa, thinking the Mamluks were broken, ordered his troops to pursue them. This was a critical mistake. As the Mongols chased Baibars' cavalry deeper into the valley, they unknowingly walked into a massive ambush. Hidden in the hills were thousands of Mamluk soldiers, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Mamluk counterattack, crushing the Mongol horde. The moment Kitbuqa's forces were deep inside the valley, Qutuz ordered his hidden troops to attack from all sides. The Mongols, caught in the tight space with no room to maneuver, suddenly found themselves surrounded by Mamluk cavalry and infantry. Mamluk archers rained arrows from the hills, hitting the Mongols from above. Mamluk lancers and swordsmen stormed in from both flanks, cutting off any chance of retreat. Heavy cavalry smashed into the Mongol ranks, engaging them in brutal hand-to-hand combat, an area where the Mamluks had the upper hand. For the first time in history, the Mongols were not the ones controlling the battlefield. The same terror they had used against others was now being turned against them. Qutuz joins the fight. Why Islamic? Despite the Mongols' initial shock, they were still one of the most battle-hardened forces in history. Kitbuqa, a fearless and ruthless commander, refused to surrender. He reorganized his troops and launched a fierce counterattack, pushing back against the Mamluks and threatening to break their lines. At this crucial moment, Sultan Qutuz himself rode into battle. Unlike many rulers who commanded from a distance, Qutuz fought alongside his soldiers, wielding his sword and shouting battle cries. According to historical accounts, he removed his helmet so that his soldiers could see his face, and with his sword raised high, he shouted, "Wa Islama! Wa Islama! O Islam! O Islam!" His cry echoed across the battlefield, reigniting the Mamluks' fighting spirit. Seeing their sultan fighting among them, the Mamluks redoubled their efforts, pushing forward with even greater determination. Kitbuqa's death, the fall of the Mongol general. As the battle raged on, Kitbuqa realized that his forces were being overwhelmed. The Mongols fought with their usual fearlessness, but for the first time, they were outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and outmatched. In a final act of defiance, Kitbuqa refused to retreat. He and his personal guards fought to the last man, but eventually, he was killed on the battlefield. With their commander dead and their formations collapsing, the remaining Mongol troops began to break ranks. For the first time in history, the mighty Mongol army was in full retreat, the aftermath of battle, the Mongols' first major defeat. The Battle of Ain Jalut had ended in a decisive Mamluk victory, a moment that would be remembered as one of the most important turning points in military history. For decades, the Mongols had appeared invincible, their empire stretching from China to Eastern Europe. They had crushed powerful armies, wiped out entire cities, and brought caliphates, kingdoms, and empires to their knees. Yet, here at Ain Jalut, they had suffered their first major defeat. But the battle itself was only the beginning of what would follow. The impact of Ain Jalut rippled across the world, reshaping the course of history. For the Mongols, it was a moment of shock and humiliation. For the Mamluks, it was a triumph that proved they were the true defenders of the Islamic world. And for the rest of the Middle East, it was a sign that the Mongol onslaught could be resisted and even defeated. The collapse of Mongol control in the Levant. Before Ain Jalut, the Mongols had been steadily advancing into the heart of the Middle East. Under Hulagu Khan, they had already destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate and sacked Baghdad, 1258, killing hundreds of thousands. Seized Aleppo and Damascus, two of the most important cities in Syria. Forced many Muslim leaders into submission, including some Crusader states that saw them as potential allies. With such momentum, it seemed inevitable that Egypt would be next. However, Ain Jalut shattered that vision. With their army crushed and General Kitbuqa dead, the Mongols were forced into a hasty retreat. Their remaining forces scattered, and the Mamluks immediately began their counteroffensive. Within months, the Mongols had lost control over much of Syria and Palestine, as the Mamluks swiftly liberated city after city. The defeat at Ain Jalut sent a clear message: the Mongols were not invincible. They could be defeated, driven back, and stopped. This psychological blow was just as significant as the military one. Egypt and the Mamluk Empire, the new guardians of Islam. The victory at Ain Jalut elevated Egypt and the Mamluk Sultanate to the status of the most powerful Muslim state in the world. Before the battle, Egypt had been seen as a region in turmoil, struggling under weak leadership. The Ayyubid dynasty had collapsed, and many questioned whether the Mamluks, a warrior class made up of former slaves, could effectively rule. Ain Jalut silenced those doubts. With their victory, the Mamluks had proven themselves to be the strongest military force in the Islamic world. They had done what no other Muslim power had managed, not the Abbasids, not the Seljuks, not the Persians. They had stood their ground against the Mongols and emerged victorious. This victory cemented their legitimacy as rulers of Egypt and protectors of Islam. Over the next century, the Mamluks would continue to expand their influence, defending the Middle East from future Mongol invasions and preserving the culture, religion, and traditions that the Mongols had sought to destroy. The Mongols' response, Hulagu's revenge, and future battles. Although the Mongols had suffered a humiliating defeat, they were far from finished. Hulagu Khan, the Mongol ruler of Persia and Iraq, was furious when he learned of Kitbuqa's defeat. He vowed revenge against the Mamluks and began preparing a massive army to launch a new invasion of the Middle East. However, at that very moment, the Mongol Empire was facing internal turmoil. Mongol Khan, the great Khan of the Mongols, had died, triggering a succession crisis. Hulagu was forced to abandon his war against the Mamluks and return to Mongolia to help secure his family's claim to the throne. The Mongol Empire, once united under Genghis Khan, was now beginning to fracture into different factions, weakening their ability to launch coordinated invasions. The Golden Horde Mongols in Russia and the Ilkhanate Mongols in Persia started to pursue their own separate interests, rather than focusing on conquering the Islamic world. As a result, the Mongols never again posed the same level of threat to the Middle East as they had before Ain Jalut. However, Mongol invasions did not end completely. Over the next few decades, they would continue to launch smaller attacks on Syria and Iraq, trying to regain lost territory. But each time, they were met with fierce Mamluk resistance. The legacy of Ain Jalut, a symbol of resistance. The Battle of Ain Jalut became more than just a military victory. It became a symbol of resistance. Throughout history, the Mongols had spread fear by destroying entire civilizations, but Ain Jalut proved that they could be challenged and even defeated. It inspired other regions to resist Mongol expansion, from India to Eastern Europe. It preserved the Islamic civilization, which may have been completely overrun had the Mongols won. It marked the beginning of the Mamluks' rise as the dominant power in the Middle East, a status they would hold for centuries. From that moment on, the Mamluks were seen as the defenders of Islam, and Ain Jalut was remembered as the battle that saved the Middle East from total destruction. The role of Sultan Qutuz, the leader who defied the Mongols. The victory at Ain Jalut was not just a triumph of strategy and battlefield tactics. It was also a testament to the unwavering leadership and bravery of Sultan Qutuz. At a time when the Mongols were considered unstoppable, and many rulers had either surrendered or fled, Qutuz stood firm. He made a bold decision to confront the Mongols head-on, even when others doubted the possibility of victory. His leadership before, during, and after the battle was instrumental in changing the course of history. Qutuz's rise to power, a leader in turbulent times. Sultan Qutuz had not come to power through inheritance or wealth. Like many Mamluk rulers, he had started his life as a slave soldier, trained from a young age in the art of war. He was part of the elite Mamluk warrior class, known for their discipline, loyalty, and unparalleled skill in battle. Before Qutuz became sultan, Egypt was in political chaos. The ruling Ayyubid dynasty was weak and divided, unable to organize a defense against the Mongol advance. After the Mongols sacked Baghdad in 1258, they turned their sights towards Syria and Egypt. Panic spread throughout the Muslim world. If Egypt fell, there would be no one left to stop the Mongols from conquering the entire Middle East. At this critical moment, Qutuz seized power in 1259, overthrowing the weak ruler and declaring himself Sultan of Egypt. His rise to power was not peaceful. Many opposed him, and he faced internal struggles from rival factions. But Qutuz knew that if the Mongols were not stopped, Egypt and the Islamic world would be destroyed. He placed survival over politics. Qutuz's bold decision to fight the Mongols. Most rulers who faced the Mongols had either surrendered or tried to negotiate. They feared the Mongols' brutal reputation. Cities that resisted were often burned to the ground, with their people slaughtered or enslaved. Some Muslim leaders, such as the Ayyubid rulers of Syria, had even submitted to Mongol rule to avoid total destruction. Qutuz, however, took a completely different approach. When the Mongol general Hulagu Khan sent a delegation demanding Egypt's surrender, Qutuz did not hesitate. Instead of complying, he executed the Mongol envoys and sent their heads back to Hulagu. This act was both brave and dangerous. No one had ever dared to openly defy the Mongols in such a way. It was a declaration of war, one that could have easily led to the total destruction of Egypt if the Mamluks lost. Preparing Egypt for war, uniting the Mamluks. Qutuz knew that a direct confrontation with the Mongols required careful preparation. The Mongols had already destroyed Baghdad, taken Aleppo, and occupied Damascus. Now, they were preparing to invade Egypt. To prepare for war, Qutuz did something that many rulers failed to do. He united Egypt's factions under a common cause. He rallied the Mamluk elite, convincing rival factions that internal disputes must be set aside if they were to survive. He strengthened Egypt's defenses, calling upon local militias and fortifying key cities. He forged alliances with other Muslim leaders, ensuring that Egypt would not fight alone. One of his greatest strategic moves was bringing Baibars into his command. Baibars was an exceptional general, known for his tactical genius and experience fighting crusaders. By putting Baibars in charge of military operations, Qutuz ensured that the Mamluk army would be led by the best strategist available. The night before battle, Qutuz's leadership under pressure. As the Mamluk army marched toward Ain Jalut, tensions ran high. The Mongols had never lost a major battle before, and many soldiers feared what was coming. Qutuz understood that morale was just as important as strategy. The night before the battle, he reportedly walked among his soldiers, speaking with them, sharing in their hardships, and reminding them why they were fighting. He told them that this battle was not just about defending Egypt. It was about defending all of Islam from destruction. Unlike many rulers who commanded from the safety of a distant fortress, Qutuz led from the front. His presence on the battlefield gave his soldiers confidence, knowing that their leader was fighting alongside them, not just issuing orders from behind. Qutuz's heroic role in battle, leading the final charge. During the battle, Qutuz's leadership proved to be the decisive factor in securing victory. At one point, as Mongol forces pushed forward and threatened to break the Mamluk lines, Qutuz did something that would change the course of the fight. He removed his helmet, making himself clearly visible to his soldiers, and rode directly into battle. He shouted, "Why Islam? O Islam," rallying his troops with his war cry. Seeing their leader personally fighting on the front lines, the Mamluk soldiers regained their strength and pushed back with renewed determination. This act of bravery inspired them to launch a final counterattack that completely crushed the Mongol army. A victory that defined a dynasty. When the dust settled, the Mongols had been defeated for the first time in history. The great Mongol General Kitbuqa lay dead, and his once unstoppable army was routed and forced to retreat. The battle had been won, and Egypt was safe. Qutuz had proven himself to be one of the greatest leaders in Islamic history. His courage, strategic planning, and unwavering determination had saved Egypt and the entire Middle East from Mongol conquest. The role of Baibars, the tactical genius behind the victory. While Sultan Qutuz played a crucial role in leading the Mamluk army, another figure emerged as the mastermind behind the battlefield tactics that ultimately led to the Mongols' defeat, Baibars. As a seasoned warrior and a brilliant strategist, Baibars was instrumental in shaping the Mamluk military strategy and executing the decisive maneuvers that trapped and annihilated the Mongol forces at Ain Jalut. Baibars' legacy as a military commander did not start at Ain Jalut. He had already proven himself in battles against the Crusaders and had developed an intimate understanding of Mongol warfare. He knew that a direct confrontation with the Mongols would be suicidal. Instead, he devised a strategy that used speed, deception, and superior battlefield positioning to outmaneuver the feared Mongol cavalry. Baibars' military background, a warrior forged in battle. Baibars was no ordinary general. He was a Mamluk warrior who had risen from slavery to become one of the greatest military minds of his time. Born in the Kipchak steppe, modern-day Kazakhstan or southern Russia, he was captured as a child and sold into slavery. Like other Mamluks, he was trained in the art of war from a young age, excelling in horsemanship, swordsmanship, and battlefield tactics. Through his years of military service, Baibars gained a reputation for bravery and intelligence. He played a key role in defending Egypt from Crusader invasions and was responsible for some of the most daring Mamluk raids against enemy forces. Baibars understood Mongol battle tactics better than most. He had studied their hit-and-run attacks, their use of psychological warfare, and their ability to lure enemies into traps. At Ain Jalut, he used these same tactics against them. The feigned retreat, Baibars' masterstroke. One of the key strategies that Baibars employed at Ain Jalut was the feigned retreat, a tactic famously used by the Mongols themselves. This tactic involved pretending to flee in panic, only to lure the enemy into an ambush. It was a high-risk strategy that required discipline and precise timing. Baibars led the Mamluk cavalry in an aggressive attack against the Mongol front lines, launching a series of rapid strikes with arrows and javelins. After inflicting initial damage, his forces suddenly retreated, making it appear as if they had lost control and were fleeing in fear. The Mongols, believing they had the upper hand, fell for the trap and began pursuing the retreating Mamluk forces deep into the narrow valleys of Ain Jalut. Once the Mongols were trapped in the valley, hidden Mamluk forces emerged from the hills and launched a devastating counterattack. The effectiveness of this maneuver was unmatched. The Mongols, who had used this very tactic for decades to deceive and destroy their enemies, now found themselves on the receiving end of their own strategy. Trapped between Mamluk archers on the hills and heavy cavalry in the valley, the Mongols had nowhere to escape. The use of terrain, Baibars' strategic advantage. Unlike the Mongols, who thrived in open battlefields where they could use their superior mobility, Baibars chose a battleground that limited their movement and forced them into tight spaces. Ain Jalut's rocky hills and forests provided natural barriers that prevented the Mongols from using their famous encirclement tactics. The Mamluks used the high ground to fire arrows down on the Mongols, weakening them before engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The Mongols, expecting an easy victory, had not scouted the battlefield properly, allowing Baibars to control the fight from the beginning. By carefully choosing the battlefield, Baibars ensured that the Mongols would not have their usual advantage. Coordinating with Qutuz, a leadership built on trust, Baibars and Qutuz formed a rare and effective partnership, one where military skill and leadership worked together seamlessly. While Qutuz was the inspirational leader who motivated the troops, Baibars was the tactical mastermind who executed the battle plan. Baibars' ability to coordinate multiple units, adapt to battlefield changes, and respond to Mongol movements in real time was key to ensuring the Mamluk's success. His coordination with Qutuz allowed for rapid decision-making when Mongol forces adjusted their attacks, strategic use of reinforcements at key moments in the battle, effective communication between different divisions of the Mamluk army, ensuring that the ambush was executed with precision. Baibars' personal combat prowess. Beyond his strategic genius, Baibars was also a formidable warrior. Unlike many generals who led from the rear, he was always in the thick of battle, personally engaging in combat alongside his soldiers. He was known for his exceptional swordsmanship, his skill with a bow, and his ability to rally his troops through sheer force of will. Many historical accounts describe how he charged fearlessly into battle, cutting down Mongol soldiers and leading decisive attacks. His presence on the battlefield gave the Mamluks confidence. They were not just following a commander, they were following a warrior who fought alongside them. The death of Kitbuqa, a decisive blow. One of the most significant moments in the battle was the death of Kitbuqa, the Mongol general. Kitbuqa was a fearless leader, known for his unyielding loyalty to the Mongol cause. Even when it became clear that his army was trapped, he refused to retreat. Baibars played a key role in leading the final assault against Kitbuqa's forces. As the Mongols fought desperately to break free, Baibars and his warriors pushed them back with relentless attacks. Eventually, Kitbuqa was surrounded and killed, a moment that broke the morale of the remaining Mongol forces. Without their general, the Mongols collapsed into disarray, and the Mamluks secured their historic victory. Baibars' role after the battle. Although Ain Jalut was a decisive victory, Baibars' story did not end there. The battle had proved his brilliance as a military leader, and in the months that followed, he would become one of the most powerful figures in the Mamluk Sultanate. His role in the victory did not go unnoticed, and within a year, he would rise to become the Sultan of Egypt, leading the Mamluk Empire into one of its most glorious eras. The Battle of Ain Jalut was not just a military engagement between the Mamluks and the Mongols, it was a pivotal moment in world history. This battle reshaped the balance of power, prevented the complete destruction of Islamic civilization, and demonstrated that the Mongols, who had swept through Asia and the Middle East like an unstoppable force, could be defeated. The impact of Ain Jalut echoed far beyond Egypt and Syria, influencing the fate of empires, trade routes, military strategies, and even the political structures of the Islamic world and Europe. The end of Mongol invincibility. Before Ain Jalut, the Mongols had never lost a major battle. From China to Eastern Europe, they had crushed every army that had dared to stand against them. Their reputation as unstoppable conquerors spread terror across the known world. Rulers either submitted willingly or were wiped out. The mere arrival of Mongol messengers demanding surrender was often enough to make kings and sultans bow before them. However, Ain Jalut shattered this aura of invincibility. For the first time in their history, the Mongols suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of an organized and disciplined army. The psychological impact of this defeat spread across Asia and Europe. It showed that the Mongols were not gods, they were not unbeatable, and they could be resisted. In later years, this realization inspired other nations to adopt new military strategies to combat Mongol aggression, leading to their eventual retreat from various territories. The protection of Islamic civilization. If the Mongols had won at Ain Jalut, the consequences for the Islamic world would have been catastrophic. The Mongols had already destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, 1258, burning the city to the ground and massacring its population. Captured Damascus and Aleppo, key centers of Islamic learning and trade. Slaughtered countless scholars, scientists, and religious leaders, wiping out centuries of accumulated knowledge. If Egypt had fallen, there would have been nothing left to stop the Mongols from marching through North Africa and into the heart of the Islamic world. The Mamluk victory at Ain Jalut saved Islamic civilization from total annihilation. The rise of the Mamluks as the defenders of Islam. With their victory at Ain Jalut, the Mamluks emerged as the most powerful Muslim rulers of their time. The Mongols had crushed the Abbasid Caliphate, which had once been the center of the Islamic world. With no strong caliphate left to defend the faith, the Mamluks took up the mantle as the protectors of Islam. Over the next few decades, they would defend the Middle East against further Mongol invasions. The Mongols attempted to invade Syria again, but the Mamluks repelled them each time. Destroy the last Crusader states in the Levant. By the end of the 13th century, the Mamluks had driven the Crusaders out of the Holy Land, securing the region for Islam. Re-establish Cairo as a center of Islamic scholarship, trade, and culture. Since Baghdad had been destroyed, Cairo became the new capital of Islamic learning, and the Mamluks built institutions that preserved Islamic traditions and teachings. Impact on Mongol politics and their fragmentation. The Mongol Empire was already facing internal struggles by the time of Ain Jalut. The death of the great Khan monk in 1259 had triggered a succession crisis, leading to infighting between different Mongol factions. Hulagu Khan, who had led the Mongol invasion of the Middle East, was forced to return to Mongolia to secure his claim, leaving behind a weaker force in the region. After their defeat at Ain Jalut, the Mongols never fully recovered in the Middle East. They had to shift their focus inward, dealing with political conflicts among different branches of the Mongol Empire, including the Golden Horde in Russia, which began pursuing its own separate policies, the Ilkhanate in Persia, which continued to exist but was permanently weakened, the Mongols in China, who would later fall to the Ming dynasty in the 14th century. Instead of continuing their relentless conquests, the Mongols gradually became more focused on governing and administration, marking the beginning of their decline as a military superpower. Ain Jalut's influence on future military tactics. The battle introduced and reinforced several military tactics that would be studied and used for centuries. The feigned retreat, the tactic of pretending to flee in panic, luring enemies into an ambush, was perfected by Baibars and the Mamluks. Later, European and Middle Eastern armies would adopt variations of this strategy. Combined arms warfare. The Mamluks demonstrated the effective coordination of cavalry, infantry, and archers in a way that set a precedent for future battles. Terrain utilization. The Mamluks' ability to choose and control the battlefield influenced how future armies would approach warfare in unfamiliar terrain. Impact on Europe and the Christian world. For Europe, the Battle of Ain Jalut was a mixed event. On one hand, the Mongols had been defeated, which removed the possibility of them attacking Europe through the Middle East. But on the other hand, it meant that the Mamluks remained strong, and they were Europe's greatest enemy in the Crusades. Some European leaders, such as King Louis IX of France, had hoped that the Mongols and the Crusaders could form an alliance to destroy the Muslim world together. But with the Mongols defeated at Ain Jalut, this alliance never materialized. Instead, the Mamluks went on to conquer the last Crusader strongholds in the Levant, permanently ending European control over the Holy Land. Economic and trade consequences. The Mongols had controlled the Silk Road and major trade routes across Asia. Their defeat at Ain Jalut weakened their influence in the Middle East, allowing the Mamluks to dominate regional trade. Cairo became a major trade hub, connecting Africa, Europe, and Asia. The spice trade, textile trade, and gold trade flourished under Mamluk rule. European merchants had to deal with Mamluk-controlled ports, which reshaped trade networks and increased the cost of goods for European markets. A turning point in Islamic and world history. The significance of Ain Jalut cannot be overstated. It was more than just a battle. It was a defining moment that saved the Islamic world from destruction, ended the myth of Mongol invincibility, shifted global trade routes and power structures, established the Mamluks as the dominant force in the Middle East. Had the Mamluks lost at Ain Jalut, the world today might look very different. The Mongols could have expanded into North Africa, potentially reaching Europe from the south. The Middle East might have been ruled by Buddhist or shamanistic Mongol rulers instead of Islamic sultans. The course of world history pivoted on this single battle, making it one of the most important conflicts of the medieval era. The Battle of Ain Jalut was far more than a military victory. It was a turning point in world history. It marked the first major defeat of the Mongols, proving that their empire was not invincible. It secured the survival of Islamic civilization, prevented further Mongol expansion into the Middle East, and cemented the Mamluks as the new defenders of the Muslim world. Had the Mongols triumphed at Ain Jalut, the consequences would have been devastating. The entire Middle East and North Africa could have fallen under Mongol rule, and the course of global history might have been drastically different. Instead, the Mamluks' victory protected the cultural, religious, and intellectual legacy of the Islamic world, allowing it to flourish for centuries to come. The battle also had a ripple effect across Europe and Asia. Mongol power began to wane, trade routes shifted, and new military strategies emerged. The lessons learned at Ain Jalut influenced future battles and shaped warfare in the medieval and early modern eras. Today, the legacy of Ain Jalut serves as a reminder of resilience, strategy, and the power of unity against overwhelming odds. It is a testament to how a well-prepared and determined force, no matter how small, can stand against a seemingly unstoppable empire and change the course of history.